Following on from my video on part 2 of the Troubles, link in the description, I think it would be a good idea to look deeper into a couple of the specific events mentioned, but in greater detail. And so, Tuesday, 5th of May, 1981, Maze Prison, aka Long Kesh, Northern Ireland. A gaunt and dishevelled man breathes his last in this life. He was a rebel campaigning for what he felt was right. His opponent, the Iron Lady, would not and could not ever give in. Join us today as Descent into Darkness examines one of the most impactful protests in British history in H Block, Bobby Sands and the Hunger Strike. Early years. Robert Gerard Sands, or Robert Geroid O'Shaughnessy in Gaelic, was born on the 9th of March 1954 in Dunmurry, County Antrim, to parents John and Rosaline. Young Bobby would be joined by 3 siblings, Marcella and Bernadette in 55 and 58 respectively, and then by John in 1962. An opportunity for the Sands family to relocate to a nicer area came up when they heard of a new housing estate being built in Newton Abbey, just north of Belfast. Sadly, the Sands family were destined for a rough time in their new surroundings. This, of course, being due to the high tensions between Catholics and Protestants that, in some ways, persist to this day. The Sands were Catholics, and the new estate was to be made up of predominantly Protestants, leading to them experiencing ongoing harassment and intimidation. By 1961, the Sands family had had enough and moved out of the area, staying with friends for a time, before the local authority granted them a house in nearby Rathcoole. As wee Bobby grew, he found a great love of football, or soccer for my US viewers, I love you all, and joined the local boys' team, which was not segregated, Catholic and Protestant playing alongside each other. Leave it to children to show the adults the way. This club was called Stella Maris and was attached to the school of the same name that Bobby attended for his early education. However, at some point the club was forced to close, but thankfully the boys were able to join another club in nearby Greencastle, so all was not lost. However, the rampant sectarianism became worse, and very soon Sands found that his former friends on the Protestant side would no longer speak to him, forcing him to stick to his own kind. In 1969, Sands finished his formal education and began apprenticing at Alexander's Coach Works in conjunction with a course at Newton Abbey Technical College. Still, the majority Protestants hounded him and threatened him. At first, Bobby was the bigger man and ignored it all, wanting to have a proper trade under his belt. But then one night, as he was leaving work in January of 1971, he was surrounded by members of the Ulster Young Militants, a loyalist sect. They threatened Sands with a knife. The small mob told him that Alexander's was a no-go for Fenian scum like him. This was the turning point for Bobby Sands. He was done playing the nice guy. It was time for action, and he knew just where to start. Joining the IRA. When Sands had taken the decision to join the IRA, he had been driven out of his apprenticeship and had taken a job in a local pub, the Glen Inn. This pub was frequented by 1 or 2 members of the organisation, and Sands tentatively approached them saying that he wanted to volunteer for the cause. Sands' first job for the paramilitary organisation was to transport a handgun from Rathcoole across to Glengormley and deliver it to another person, as the man who was originally supposed to do the job was a no-show. An easy job to start off, especially in the days before widespread CCTV. From here, Sands quickly gained the trust and respect of other volunteers in the area and went about further recruiting some of his like-minded Catholic friends to the organisation, until he was the head of a 7-man cell. They did not have a direct connection to the Army Council, and so operated either alone or with other known contacts in the area. Still, the violence towards Catholics grew and grew, and in Rathcoole, the Sands family home was once again targeted, forcing another move. This time to the Catholic area of West Belfast known as Twinbrook in 1972. By the following year, almost all Catholic families had been driven out of Rathcoole, save for a handful of holdouts. Arrest and imprisonment. In October of 1972, Sands was arrested by the RUC for illegal possession of a handgun, for which he was punished with a 5-year sentence, being released in 1976 for good behaviour. But in the March of 1973, while still in jail, Bobby would marry Geraldine Node, who was pregnant at the time. Their child was born the following May, a son named Gerard. Both Geraldine and Gerard would then later move to England. Almost immediately after his release, he resumed his activities with the IRA, along with another man, Joe McDonnell. They planned a bombing of the Balmoral Furniture Company in Dunmurry, southwest Belfast, to take place later that year, in around 6 months' time. This would be a 9-man job, and involved a series of petrol bombs and other explosives. They held the security guard at gunpoint and quickly escorted the staff and customers who were in the store down to the basement of the building, whilst the 4 devices were planted. However, the plan was rumbled when an employee from the business next door had just arrived in his car and had saw what was going on in the furniture shop. So, thinking quickly, he drove his car up onto the pavement and hard up against the entrance doors, preventing them from opening. He then scrambled out of his car and ran to phone the police. The RUC quickly descended on the area and had the place surrounded in short order. Seeing as they were left with little choice, the IRA men decided to attempt to fight their way out, and a gun battle soon broke out. Some of the rebels did manage to get clear, whilst 2 were wounded by gunfire. Sands and 3 of his accomplices, including Joe McDonnell and Seamus Finucane, all piled into a car where they tried to play all innocent. The RUC saw through the ruse and arrested all of them. When the car was searched, a revolver was found, leading to their conviction. Strangely, they were only charged with handgun possession and nothing to do with the explosives, but still, a 14-year prison sentence was handed down by the court. Initially, Sands was held at Crumlin Road Prison, where he got into a fight with other prisoners, which saw him sent down the segregation wing. He refused to wear the standard prison uniform, and so the guard stripped him naked and left him in his cell with no personal items, save for a Bible, for 13 hours a day. Throughout his incarceration, Sands spent some of his time documenting his experiences, and even took to writing poetry and songs. But in October of 1976, Sands was transferred to Maze Prison, aka Long Kesh. It would be here that Bobby Sands' name would forever go down in history. The protests. As already mentioned in my 2 previous videos on the Troubles, the policy of internment had already caused huge backlash amongst the Republican community. Most of the ire would be directed at the so-called H-blocks of Long Kesh, where many Republican agitators and suspected IRA men, including Jerry Adams at one point, would be imprisoned without trial. Sands wrote of his treatment in Long Kesh, "The screws," that's the prison guards, "removed me from my cell naked, and I was conveyed to the punishment block in a blacked-out van. As I stepped out of the van on arrival there, they grabbed me from all sides and began punching and kicking me to the ground. They dragged me by the hair across a stretch of hardcore rubble to the gate of the punishment block. The full weight of my body recoiled forward again, smashing my head against the corrugated iron covering around the gate." In 1980, Irish Republican prisoners demanded to be reclassified as political prisoners as opposed to criminals, which would have granted them much better conditions. The then Conservative government under Margaret Thatcher flatly denied this request. In response, the internees carried out numerous types of protests, including refusal to wash or wear prison-issued clothing, covering themselves instead with blankets. This would become known as the blanket protest. Then there was the so-called dirty protest, by which they would not use the toilet in their cells and smear the walls with their own excrement. And then there was the most impactful of all, the hunger strike. The prisoners' demands were as follows. Number 1, the right not to wear a prison uniform. 2, the right not to do prison work. 3, the right of free association with other prisoners and to organize educational and recreational pursuits. 4, the right to 1 visit, 1 letter and 1 parcel per week. And 5, full restoration of remission lost through protest. On the 27th of October 1980, 7 prisoners refused food until they were granted political status. Brendan Hughes, Tommy McKierney, Sean McKenna, John Nixon, Leo Green Lurgan, Tommy McFeely and Raymond McCartney. By December, the British government appeared to relent on their stance, but not long after the hunger strike was called off, the British reneged on their promise, and so, on the 1st of March 1981, Bobby Sands, who had risen to the rank of leader of the interned IRA and INLA members, began another hunger strike, along with 23 other inmates. The names of the strikers were, in no particular order, of course, Bobby Sands, Brendan McLaughlin, Paddy Quinn, Lawrence McKeown, Francis Hughes, Kevin Lynch, Kieran Doherty, Joe McDonnell, Jackie McMullen, Hugh Carville, Patrick Sheehan, Patsy O'Hara, Martin Herson, Patrick McGowan, Bernard Fox, John Pickering, James Devine, Raymond McCreish, Thomas McElwee, Jackie McMullen, Gerard Hodgkins, Matt Devlin, Michael Devine, and Liam McCloskey. They began their individual hunger strikes at staggered times to drag the protest out for as long as possible. This caused a huge media sensation, with news outlets providing constant updates and speculation on Sands' well-being. This put huge pressure on Mrs. Thatcher, but still she would not budge, claiming variously, "That is what political status means, special privileges for having done cold, callous, brutal murder. We are not prepared to consider special category status for certain groups of people serving sentences for crime. Crime is crime is crime. It is not political." It is highly likely that Mrs. Thatcher's hardline stance against the IRA was born out of the 1979 murder of her political mentor, Erie Neve. Neve had been the one to coach her through her early years as an MP, and his murder via a car bomb absolutely devastated Thatcher, who called Neve her greatest friend. But a twist to the tale that no one could have foreseen was just around the corner, and it was to become a massive boost for the protesters' case. The Fermanagh and South Tyrone by-election. A huge political coup was struck for the IRA by the timely by-election in the constituency of Fermanagh and South Tyrone. The previous incumbent, Frank Maguire, had suddenly taken a heart attack and died. Some then came up with the idea of adding Sands' name to the ballot. The campaign was to run on an anti-H-block stance and was overseen by Owen Carron, who ran things for Sands on the outside. Bobby Sands won the election on the 9th of April 1981 by the skin of his teeth against his main rival on the ballot, Harry West of the Ulster Unionist Party. 30,493 votes versus 29,046, a difference of only 1,447 votes. This made Bobby the youngest ever Member of Parliament at that time. This created a bit of quiet panic amongst the Westminster elite, as they now might have to take Sands seriously, as he had become one of them. But still, despite this turn-up, Maggie Thatcher stuck to her guns and refused to budge on the issue of political status. But Sands and his comrades also stuck to their guns. Sadly, neither side blinked first in this very serious game of chicken, and some would now have to pay the ultimate price for it. Deaths. Sadly for Sands and his supporters, political status never came, but very soon, the Reaper would. On the 5th of May 1981, a dishevelled and emaciated Bobby Sands died at the age of 27, 66 days into his hunger strike. Loyal to their leader, over the next few weeks, 9 more IRA internees would follow him into the forever after. Francis Hughes, aged 25, died after 59 days without food. Raymond McCreish, aged 24, survived for 61 days. Patsy O'Hara, aged 23, 61 days. Joe McDonnell, aged 30, also 61 days. Martin Herson, aged 29, lived for 46 days. Kevin Lynch, aged 25, 71 days. Kieran Doherty, aged 25, 73 days. Thomas McElwee, 23, 62 days. And Thomas Devine, aged 27, for 60 days. The remaining 13 men were taken off their strike for various reasons throughout the period. Bobby Sands' funeral at Belfast's Milltown Cemetery was attended by 100,000 people. Gerry Adams was one of the pallbearers. 3 men in balaclavas stepped forward with rifles to fire a 3-volley salute over the coffin. On the very same day, as a kind of counter-protest, Ian Paisley held a mass service for Unionists to commemorate all victims of the IRA. Thatcher had stood strong and had won, but had become a figure of intense hatred, something that she would later be used to by those who fell victim to her various domestic policies too. The huge wave of hate towards Mrs. Thatcher and the British establishment, and the Republican support that her stance had whipped up, served to offer the IRA a whole new field of conflict, a much more peaceful means: politics. If they couldn't get what they wanted by fighting for it, they could try voting for it. The election of Bobby Sands showed that there was widespread support for a political solution, and Sinn Féin were ready to take advantage of that. But this strategy risked splitting the IRA once again, as it had done in 1968 to create the Provisional IRA. This led to fighting within the Republican movement that saw yet more deaths as both sides battled for ideological control of the campaign. Tommy McKierney, a fellow internee and who had participated in the earlier 1980 hunger strike, who was on the same wing as Sands, said of that time, "When Bobby Sands was elected, those within the movement, who for long had been worried or sceptical or hesitant about engaging in an electoral strategy, here was clear evidence that there was a potential for success. I believe that eventually there had to be a conflict of interest between a political electoral strategy and an armed campaign. It is not possible to run a parliamentary campaign while attempting to overthrow the same state that you're hoping to manage." Aftermath and legacy. The hunger strikes had far-reaching consequences all over the world, particularly in the USA, where the large Irish-American community were thoroughly appalled by the treatment of their kinfolk. Irish Americans funneled millions of dollars into the IRA via the charity NORAID, which was set up by Michael Flannery. On top of this, because America, many attempts were made to smuggle large shipments of guns and explosives to Northern Ireland. The largest of these was overseen by James Whitey Bulger of the Boston Irish Mob. Although the shipment was intercepted, it was just one of many, and plenty did manage to get through. In fact, weapons had been sourced from the USA for at least 40 years, if not longer, as highlighted by a landmark gun-running trial in 1982. The 4 indicted men, including Flannery, had even admitted as much in open court. But amazingly, all of them were acquitted to rapturous applause from the public gallery. This very public showpiece led to many more millions pouring into NORAID from all over to support the cause. Marches and demonstrations were held in many European cities condemning the inaction of the UK government in allowing Sands and his comrades to perish. But as far as the 1980s goes, if ever there was a time that the Republicans came close to breaking the resolve of the British government, it was this event. Their support had grown exponentially, and the outrage on the world stage was loud and firm. However, the Iron Lady lived up to her moniker, and she held fast in the face of massive public pressure from all over. I truly do not believe that any other Western leader, other than perhaps Reagan, would have done the same. Following Sanders' election to Parliament, a law was quickly brought through that now forbade those convicted of a criminal offence from standing for a candidacy. A rule that seems somewhat spiteful to cover their own backsides, but to be fair, it does have merit. Once Sands had died, another election had to be held for the Fermanagh and South Tyrone seat, which was won by Sands' former campaign manager, Owen Carron, who decided to stand, increasing the majority as a result. Furthermore, when the Irish Parliament held their elections in that same year, 2 candidates also standing on an anti-H Bloc ticket would win seats in the Dáil Éireann, but they refused to take up their seats as Republicans saw the Dáil as illegitimate, as they did not rule over the entirety of the island of Ireland. This stance would later change in 1986 when members of Sinn Féin voted to no longer boycott Dublin. When one examines the facts of the matter and leaves emotion out of it completely, you will see that there was no way at all that Mrs. Thatcher could have ever given in. If she had, it would have been a massive beacon to the IRA that this was how you get whatever you wanted. To have handed them this golden ticket would have been nothing short of political suicide. Now, don't get me wrong, I am no fan of Maggie, but I do believe in fairness, and on this one, I'm afraid, whether rightly or wrongly, she had no choice in the matter. Bobby's sister, Bernadette, herself a staunch Republican, was asked for her opinion upon the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, which officially ended the Troubles. She said of it, "Bobby didn't die for cross-border bodies with executive powers. He did not die for nationalists to be equal to British citizens within the Northern Ireland state." Bobby Sands would even be referenced as an inspiration by US rock/metal band Rage Against the Machine in the album sleeve of their self-titled debut record, as well as having many songs written about him by artists across the musical spectrum. Murals still adorn several buildings in Northern Ireland commemorating his protest and demise, and he is further portrayed in the films H3, Hunger, and Some Mother's Son. His son Gerard would go on to have a daughter of his own, named Erin, who went on to play women's football, where she would be part of a County Down team that won the 2023 All-Ireland Junior Ladies Football Championship. I'm sure Bobby would have been so proud of his granddaughter for that. And I know I already used this to close out part 2 of the Troubles video, but it's such a good rendition that you're going to get it again. So here is my mate Mally Scott singing a song penned by Sands himself that was later set to music by Christy Moore, who borrowed the melody from Gordon Lightfoot's Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So, take it away, Mally, me old China.
In 1803 we sailed out to sea, out from the sweet town of Derry, for Australia bound. If we didn't all drown, the marks of our fetters we carried. In rusty iron chains we cried for our wains, our good wives we left in sorrow. As the mainsails unfurled, our curses we hurled at the English and thoughts of tomorrow. At the mouth of the foil bid farewell to the soil, as down below decks we were lying. Oh, Doherty streamed, woken out of a dream by a vision of bold Robert dying. The sun burned cruel as we dished out the gruel. Dan O'Connor was down with a fever. 60 rebels today out for Botany Bay. How many will reach the receiver? Oh, I wish I was back home in Derry. Oh, I wish I was back home in Derry. We cursed them to hell as our bow fought the swell. Our ship danced like a moth in the firelight. White horses rode high as the devil passed by, taking souls to Hades by twilight. 5 weeks out to sea, we were now 43. We buried our comrades each morning. In our own slime we were lost in the time, endless night without dawning. Oh, I wish I was back home in Derry. Oh, I wish I was back home in Derry. Van Diemen's Land is a hell for a man to live out his whole life in slavery, where the climate is raw and the gun makes the law. Neither wind nor rain care for bravery. 20 years have gone by, I've ended my bond. My comrades' ghosts walk behind me. A rebel I came, I'm still the same. On a cold winter's night you will find me. Oh, I wish I was back home in Derry. Oh, I wish I was back home in Derry.
Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you found it informative and interesting. If you did, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to DID to see even more deep dive videos on all aspects of the dark side of history. What do you think of today's topic? Let me know in the comments and I will happily read and respond to as many as I can. If you wish to do so, you can support DID on Patreon, link in the description, or via the super thanks button, or you can become a member of the channel right here on YouTube. And don't forget to check out my merch store for some sweet branded swag. And also don't forget to check out my alternate channel DID Reads, where I post short stories, poetry and famous speeches, and now even children's stories, because why should the kiddies miss out? And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I shall see you on our next descent into darkness.